3 years later, they fired their Super Bowl winning head coach. They traded the highest paid QB in franchise history. And they traded down in the 2021 NFL Draft. What does it all mean now? Find out during the draft from the premier Philadelphia Eagles reporter, Derek Gunn. Watch, listen to Draft Takes with Derek Gunn across the JAKIB Media Network, YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
I see on my screen that we are joined by the former host of the NFL Draft on ESPN. He's got as much insight to the draft as anybody we know. Trey Wingo joins us here on Birds 365. Trey, Jody Mack, and John McMullen here. How are you, bud?
Great to be with you guys. How are you?
Doing well, Trey. Thrilled to have you. Obviously, you've had a long career with the NFL Draft at ESPN. Now you're at Pro Football Network. Kind of take us through what you're doing now, and we'll get into some of your highlights with the NFL Draft coverage a little bit later.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm working with PFN, Pro Football Network. We do one digital show a week on their YouTube channel. I also work with PGA Tour Live now, calling golf events. I've also started a podcast, Half Forgotten History, which has been great. We've got 2.5 million views already and 11,000 subscribers, so that's going really well. And I can break a little news here. I'm actually going to be working with Fox on the draft. Flying out to LA today, and
wow,
for their interactive draft coverage on foxsports.com and on their Twitter, Fox Sports, NFL on Fox, their YouTube page, and their Instagram accounts. So we're doing a virtual draft party, and we're going to do a draft watch party there with Jordan Palmer, who's worked with Zach Wilson and a couple of the quarterbacks in the draft, TJ Hushmanzada, who's worked out with Kyle Pitts, Jeff Schwartz, who has worked out with Penei Sewell and a bunch of the offensive linemen in this draft. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. Are they going to put you through the car wash? Does that mean you got to go on with Bayless and the entire list of the Fox talking head shows prior to the draft?
I'm hoping that's not the case, but I think back. But hey, whatever they want for the next few days, I'll be happy to help them out. It's going to be a lot of fun. Plus, as a side gig, just so you guys know, my son works on the Fox Sports digital side. So,
okay.
Well, so I'll get to boss him around again like he was back in the house, which is going to be great.
Very nice.
Yeah, Trey, I mean, it's been a strange year for everybody, obviously. And you go back all the way to last year's draft, the first virtual draft. This year, people are going to be able to get together in Cleveland. Kind of talk about these last two drafts, just how unique they were from a coverage standpoint, and also, from the football side, how difficult it is to get information, all that kind of thing.
It's interesting, right? Because last year's draft, the only thing that changed was the execution of it. We had a combine. We had most of the pro days last year. So the only change last year was how we present the draft. So that was the challenge last year. It was me in a studio by myself with a camera operator and a floor manager, and we were the only people in there. And everyone was set up remotely. And obviously the NFL Network studios were shut down. So we did our show for ESPN and also the NFL Network. And the cooperation between ESPN and the NFL Network last year was amazing. This year, I think the draft is going to be much more challenging in terms of its talent evaluation, because we didn't have a full season. Some guys played 13 games at Alabama. Some played 6. Some didn't play at all. Penei Sewell, I just mentioned, and a couple of other top, Rashawn Slater, the tackle out of Northwestern, and they're going to go in the first round. We didn't have a combine, and you see all these pro days where everyone's running these amazing 40s.
Yeah, never saw so many 4.3s in my life.
Yeah, I think a lot of the NFL scouts are like, wait a minute, is that a on here? So I think it's a lot more stressful on the talent evaluators this year than it was last year. Last year, just like they went through their whole thing. We just had to execute it differently. It was more stressful for us. I think this is way more stressful on the talent evaluators. And by the way, this week on Half Forgotten History, my podcast, which you can get on my YouTube page, Trey Wingo Presents, GM of the Chargers, Tom Telesco, will we'll talk about how weird it is this year and how good it is to go into a draft knowing you have your quarterback. So I think it was stressful for us last year. I think it's much more stressful for the talent evaluators this year.
Trey, not doing it in the same studio last year with Mel Kiper probably got you ready for the withdrawal of not working with Mel, or made your life easier by not having to work with Mel. So I know you're looking forward to that. This year's draft class, we know quarterbacks are going to go high, 3 for 3 at the top, maybe the first 4 picks in the draft. Everyone wants to know, is it because this really is that good a quarterback draft that it could go 4 for 4 at the top and 5 in the first 10 or 12 or 13? Or is it just the need for quarterbacks in the National Football League that these kids get artificially pushed up the board? Because if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a team. Your evaluation, the individuals making these picks that you've been able to talk to, give me your read on the top quarterback class of 2021.
Well, it's interesting. And I think, Jody, what you said there at the end was the most important thing. Everyone feels like they got to have a dude, right? And we go through this thing so quickly. So it seems like every year we hear he's the next this, he's the next this. And then half the time it doesn't work out. Let's just go back. Let's start at the 2015 draft. The first 2 picks were Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota. Neither are on the team that drafted him. 2016, as you guys well know, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz went 1-2. Neither of those quarterbacks are on the team that drafted him. 2017, the first quarterback off the board, Mitch Trubisky. Patrick Mahomes was just sitting there. He's now backing up Josh Allen in Buffalo. 2018, Sam Darnold. Second overall, now or third overall, wherever it was, and now he's gone and is with the Carolina Panthers, and Josh Rosen has been on 3 teams already. So, it is a position that is vastly overdrafted now because of the way the game is played, and more importantly, the way the game is legislated. Like, there are 4 positions that are most important in football right now: quarterback, protecting the quarterback, catching the ball from the quarterback, and sacking the quarterback. That's it. That's how the game. That's how the game is done, officiated, evaluated, adjudicated. So those are the positions. There are potentially really good quarterbacks in this draft. I think Trevor Lawrence has been on this arc for a long time, on an Elway, Andrew Luck type arc. Like, he's been the guy, and there's not been much change about that. And people have thought very highly of him for 2 or 3 years. Other than that, Zach Wilson, hey, he looked great this year. Was not great the year before. Could it continue? Absolutely. I take the Zen philosopher approach. We'll see. It all sounds great on draft night, but go back, 4 or 5 years ago when the Eagles drafted Carson Wentz, they thought they'd got it locked up forever. And now he's in Indianapolis, and you have potentially 3 first-round picks next year, which makes the Eagles, by the way, very interesting in this year's draft, because they potentially will have 3 first-round picks next year if Wentz plays 75% of the snaps or 70%, and they make the postseason.
Yeah. Yep.
I like Jalen Hurts a lot, but I don't think anybody can say there's been enough of a sample size for them to know what he is or what he isn't. So if the Eagles are interested in one of these guys, they have the capital to go up and get one with those 3 first-round picks. That's what it takes to move up. And I would keep your eye on Philadelphia this year.
You always keep your eye on Howie Roseman, Trey. You know that. But,
both
you bring up, I think it's interesting. You bring up the Winston Mariota draft and then the Jared Goff, Carson Wentz draft. And you're right. Quarterbacks get pushed up the board. And at the same time, it seems like teams are willing to move on from them much quicker than in the past. How do you kind of explain that counterintuitive thinking, or that's just the evolution of the league?
Well, it's interesting. Certainly a big factor was when the rookie wage scale went in, right? I mean, the deals that say the Sam Bradfords and the Matthew Staffords of the world no longer exist for a quarterback taking 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever it is. We're talking 50, 60 million guaranteed money right away. When Cam Newton went first overall in 2011, I think his guaranteed money was 20 million. So it does make it a lot easier to move on from a quarterback if you don't think so, based on the salary cap. Now, clearly that is not the case in Philadelphia, where you're rocking a $34 million cap hit because you signed him to the big contract after a couple of years of success. But for the most part, that makes it easier. But I will say I'm not sure it's correct all the time. I think everybody's lost patience. Go back and look at Drew Brees' first few years in the NFL with the Chargers. They took him in the second round, first pick of the second round. Took him a few years to get on the field. Then a few years later, they drafted Phillip Rivers. If you go look at the first 4 years of Drew Brees' career, people would say he's a journeyman. He's just a guy. And now he's going to go down as one of the top quarterbacks of all time with almost every single passing record as he retires and walks into the Hall of Fame. So is it easier to move on? Yes. Does that mean it's the right decision? I don't think so a lot of times. Like if the Jets, for example, had done with Sam Darnold what the Bills did with Josh Allen, we'd be talking about a completely different player. They drafted Josh Allen in Buffalo. They believed in what they had. They surrounded him with talent, and he was an MVP candidate last year. Well, Sam Darnold has been through the cycle in New York, didn't really have a bunch of great draft picks around him, didn't have a lot of weapons to work with, and lo and behold, he's on his second team. And, oh, by the way, Carolina still hasn't picked up his fifth-year option. They said they were going to, but they don't have to until the first week of May, which coincidentally is also after the first round of the draft, which makes me think, I think they're going to play their cards close to the vest, see how the draft board falls, and if for whatever reason, one of those guys that they really like falls to them or think they can get him at 8 or maybe move up, wouldn't surprise me if they dip their toe in the quarterback market as well.
Trey, it's the way we always handle it because it just makes sense. First pick of the draft, and then you start thereafter to evaluate everything else. And most of the times we slow down after the first 15, 20, 25, and certainly the first round, first day. And then comes day 2, which round 2 and round 3. And you're a guy who's hosted both day 1, day 2, day 3, done it all. Day 2 and day 3 are pretty damn important in building a organization that can go to a Super Bowl. Yeah. In your experience, are there a team or a couple teams that do the day 2, day 3 thing better than everybody else?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because we get so enamored with the first round, and you can totally whiff on your first round pick and still have a hellaciously good draft. I mean, the first round pick is the shiny toy and the shiny object, right? But if you go down and look at how rosters are built, the majority of your team is rounds 3 through 7 and undrafted free agents. So team construct is what the draft is really all about. Now, most fans just know the names of the Thursday night guys, so that's what they gravitate towards. But, you've seen Seattle over the years come up with some really, really good players in the late rounds. You've seen the Patriots do it. There are teams and championship teams that are built on rounds 3 through 7 of the draft because I feel like when you're looking at a first-round player, there's a lot of CYA. In these evaluators, they're like, because if it doesn't go well, they can say, well, look, he had the size, he had the speed, he had the 3-cone drill time. I mean, look at the size of his arms, look at the size of his hands. He checked all the boxes. And I think a lot of times they take people in the first round because they have the potential based on the physical skill set that they have. Well, then when you go into the second and third round, you start looking at different things. You just kind of start watching tape more and you just see the guy can play. I mean, it's funny, right? 2012, we had Andrew Luck go 1 overall. RG3 went 2. Ryan Tannehill went 8. Tannehill has settled in nicely. RG3 is looking for work. Andrew Luck retired early, although a little battered. But the quarterback out of that draft was Russell Wilson in the 3rd round. And the only reason he was in the 3rd round in 2012 was because he was under 6 feet. Obviously, that has changed dramatically over the last couple of years with what we've seen out of Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray going overall number 1 the last couple of drafts, 2018, 2019. But, I do think people look at a checklist on a first-round pick, and I feel like the second and really the 3rd round on, the checklist goes out the window, and they just say, can this guy play?
Yeah. Trey, you mentioned day 3. One of the best players I ever covered on a day-to-day basis was John Randall, who wasn't even drafted.
Right.
And that was when the draft was 12 rounds, which kind of tells you, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So you can find players on day 3. But, as somebody who's covered this draft, I got to ask you, as much prep as we do, as much work as we do, when you get the offensive lineman from Washburn, do you just say, Mel?
There's a great guy who has for years at ESPN put together the draft packets for me, which would include, I want to say all positions in. We're talking about 400 or 500 players.
Yeah.
So there was one instance, though, to your point about Mel. There was one instance. It was one of the last years we were in Radio City in New York, and I can't remember what year it was. It might have been 2011, 2012, something like that. There was a kid that was drafted, a defensive tackle out of an HBCU school in North Carolina, that wasn't on the official list of draftees that the NFL actually hands out as potential draftees, but he was in Mel's Blue Book. He was, which doesn't exist anymore except online, but he was in Mel's Blue Book. And that was like, to me, a crowning achievement for Mel. Good for you, dude. You found this guy and scouted this guy and evaluated this guy, and even the NFL didn't think he had a chance of being drafted. So there are certainly those, but to Jim Carr did such a great job for me over the years. I'm happy to say he's working with us now at Pro Football Network, and I've got my binder ready to roll. It's a little less thick because I don't have to worry about round 7, pick 250 this year, but his notes are really good, and he made us all look a lot smarter.
I want to follow up on one more thing, Trey, as you said about how the quarterbacks size-wise are viewed has changed a little bit because of Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. You don't have to be 6'4". Trey Lawrence is 6'4", and he looks like the prototypical quarterback. It hasn't disappeared, but there's a little bit more leeway.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about one of the more debatable players, and we've been doing it here on Birds 365, and that's Devonta Smith.
Yeah.
I think the kid they use the word unicorn to describe Kyle Pitts. I think the same thing about Smith. I think he just is a phenomenal football player and talent. I get it. He's 166 pounds. And there are very few wide receivers in the history of the league who've been 166 pounds and been stars. I think he rewrites it. Do you? How does size affect wide receivers? Is there the ability to compromise like there was with the point you just made about quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think there is. And obviously, anybody would like him to be a little bigger. There's no question. But T.Y. Hilton, he played around that same weight. And I think at 166, we're still talking a kid who's growing. I think you can probably figure to add 5 to 7 pounds on him. When it's all said and done. He's still probably maturing a little bit. So let's say his playing weight is probably going to be somewhere between, let's say, 172 and 177. Well, Marvin Harrison played at about 185. Now, I get it. That's another 10 to 12 pounds. But it was also in an era where you could really, crush those guys across the middle. That's not as much of the way the game is played anymore. So much to your point about quarterbacks that are mobile and smaller sort of fit this NFL better. I think 10 years ago, we might have had a different discussion about Devonta Smith, but because of the way the game is played and legislated, I don't think it's going to be a big deal one way or the other. He's either going to be a player or not, and it won't be because of his weight.
Yeah, Trey, that's interesting. That's the second time you brought up that word. I use it all the time to talk about the NFL as well, and that's legislated. Yeah. How this game is now legislated. How much has that changed the draft process, just how teams value players? You mentioned Russell Wilson. I constantly hear if Russell Wilson was 6'4", he'd be a top 5 pick. Ended up in the 3rd round. You mentioned Devonta Smith at 166 pounds. Doesn't have to worry about, Ronnie Lott or Kenny Easley taking off his head in the middle of the field any longer. So maybe that does give him a new avenue that other receivers didn't have in the past.
Yeah, listen, it definitely has changed. Or, go back to the great Philly secondary with Andre Waters, and that you can't do that anymore. I mean, you can do it once and you'll get ejected and fined. You do it a couple of times and you're gone. And, we've seen the Vontaze Burfict, and the way he's played and how many times has he been kicked out of games and been suspended. So, it's just, you can't do that anymore. So I do think it changes the way you look at people, and it also changes the way you feel like what you need. Von Miller years ago realized, okay, I can't hit the quarterback the way I used to. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go for the ball every time. And instead of like trying to hit the quarterback with a big hit, sometimes his entire goal would be, let's just see if I can slap the ball out of the guy's hands. And that counts as a sack for me anyway. And it puts the ball on the ground without me worried about getting a penalty for roughing the passer. So you're right. the way the game is legislated, dictated, and sort of played now changes your evaluation, which is why I said earlier, those 4 positions are far and away the most important in the NFL right now. You used to, hey, give me a Bill Bergey type in the middle, and go out there and just knock the stuffing out of people. And those players are still important. Don't get me, Darius Leonard with Indianapolis is having a really good career. But I don't think those kind of players can be the game changers that they have been in the past. You have to worry about mobility and speed and agility and the bone crunching hits that we all sort of grew up on. It's not the way the NFL wants to see this anymore.
Trey, last one for me, and I'll go to one of those positions that you referenced, ability to get to the quarterback like a Von Miller. Yeah. I think this draft is woefully short of those type of players. There's a reason why no one is mentioning a speed rushing, pass rushing, either 4-3 D end or 3-4 outside linebacker, because I just don't think they're there. They would be pushed up, probably not as much as quarterback, but they would be pushed up, and right. They're not. There's going to be one of them that's going to make me look foolish as I continue to say, there's just not a good pass rusher in this lot. Yeah. Who's it going to be? Where's he going to go? Who's the best pass rusher in this draft? When's he coming? When's he going to hear his name called?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, historically, we could have no defensive players taken in the top 10, which would be a first in the common draft era. We've never had a draft where there wasn't a single defensive player taken in the top 10. So that tells you about the quality of the draft. The kid out of Michigan is a lot of the people that talk about. The kid out of Penn State, the outside linebacker, people really love him as well. And all the 40 times, a lot of them.
4.38 on that, Trey. 4.38 defensive end.
Yeah, and then there's the kid out of the 2 kids out of Miami, Phillips and Rousseau. Phillips had an amazing pro day. But, here's a guy that had to walk away from football when he was at UCLA because of concussions. And where, are you willing to take that kind of a gamble on a guy who might be one hit away from, no longer being able to contribute? And then the kid Rousseau out of Miami is also fascinating because he was a quarterback and tight end in high school, transferred. Sorry, you there?
Yeah, we got
you.
Became a different position at Miami, but only had 1 year and opted out, and then really did not have a good pro day at all. So, you see the physical traits, you see the skills, but how much can you really trust on what you've seen on tape based on limited snaps?
Yeah, Trey. And by the way, check out Trey. Broke some news for us. Going to be Fox Sports Digital draft coverage. That is very good news.
For a minute, I don't know what's going on.
Do we still got you, Trey?
Well, we're seeing him. I don't know if he's hearing us, but fire away, Johnny Mac. See if you can get your last question in.
Yeah, guys, I can't hear you. I apologize.
It's all right.
What's going
on? We can hear you. So if you get it, I was going to bring up the Phillips kid from Miami of Florida. You mentioned he shifted from UCLA cross country. He, to me, is the one top 10 talent. I don't think Trey is hearing us.
No, nor do I. All right. We'll let Trey go. But as John said, going to be part of Fox's coverage leading up to the NFL draft. They are not a broadcast partner, but Fox is very much a player in the National Football League as one of their main broadcasters. Yes, if he's heading out to the left coast, my guess is they'll put him on with Bayless and Sharp. They'll put him on with Coward. They'll put him on all the shows. You got Trey Wingo in the house. You're going to use him. Use him up. Get the most down that you can. And we tried to do just that. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing from Trey Wingo here with us on Birds 365. All right, let's take a final timeout. Come back. John and I will give you 10, 15 more minutes of Eagles conversation leading up to the draft on Thursday night. Thanks for tuning in to Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.